Cool. So we're just going to get ourselves started. So today we're going to be looking at reef fish ecology. So we're not going to be doing any IDing today, all right? We're actually just going to look at the kind of background, okay? So kind of the background information to reef fish so that, so we know kind of a little bit more about fish before we actually start trying to identify them, okay? So here's an overview of the lectures that we're going to look at today. So we're going to have a look at diversity of reef fish, okay? We're then going to look at some adaptations that reef fish have. And some of these adaptations include body shape, colorations and markings, feeding strategies, protection strategies, and symbiotic relationships, okay? And then at the very end, I'm going to give you guys some tips for identification of fish. Get keen for that. So first off, coral reefs have some of the most diverse fish assemblages of all aquatic ecosystems. Reef fish is actually, the diversity is actually greatest in the Indo-Pacific area, okay? There's about 4,000 to 5,000 species there that we estimate, might be more than that, okay? And the reason for this is that the Indo-Pacific is such a large area, okay? And it's also one of the oldest areas in terms of ocean areas, okay? So there's been a lot of time for reef fish to evolve and diversify, So this diversity, this amazing diversity that we get on coral reefs is due to millions of years of co-evolution between fish, corals, algae, and invertebrates. Okay, the formation of reefs themselves has also created amazing habitat complexity, and so there's huge numbers of little niche habitats. And so because you've got all these different types of habitats, you've got lots of space to grow and change and adapt. And so that's also why we have so much reef fish diversity on reefs. Because reefs are so dynamic, there is also lots of variation in food availability over time and region on the reef. Okay, so this allows for the huge diversity as different species develop and evolve special feeding behaviors based on all those little different niche habitats and food feeding areas and all of that to survive. And then, of course, there is a lot of interactions between all of these factors. So that definitely helps as well. So looking at adaptations, fish have various physical and behavioral adaptations which can serve as useful characteristics for identification. So some of these include the shape of the body, colorations and markings on the body and on the whole fish. We can also look at feeding strategies, protection strategies, and symbiotic relationships, okay? And we're going to go through each of these in a bit of detail now. So certain anatomical features can be used to help us identify fish. For example, are the fin rays prominent or not very obvious? So you want to look at the dorsal fin for that, okay? So we'd be looking at the dorsal fin and having a look at whether it looks quite spiky or is it more like fleshy looking. You can also look at whether it's a single continuous dorsal fin or whether it looks like it's kind of split into sections. We also want to have a look at some other characteristics. So some fish have what we call cirri, which kind of look like little eyebrows or little eyelashes that sit like on the head region. So we can have a look at them. So for example, these guys over here, these are your cirri. You can also have a look at the barbel, okay? So some fish have a barbel, which is kind of like a fleshy projection from the chin. So that can be used to help you identify what kind of fish it is. We also want to be looking at the shape of the caudal fin. Now, the caudal fin is just a fancy name for the tail, okay? So you want to be looking at the tail or the caudal fin. And there are several ways that we can describe the shape of the caudal fin. So we can either describe it as concave, convex, truncate, forked, or lunate. And you can see these examples over here at the bottom of the screen. We also like to look at the shape and the size of the pectoral fins. That also gives us a good indication of how the fish swims, how it maneuvers itself on the reef, and can be quite a good feature to look at when identifying. So the lateral line is a system of sensory organs. You'll be able to see a tiny, a line of tiny pores along the length of the fish's body. Now, the way the lateral line works is it's basically a system of canals that are filled with fluids. So any change in movement, vibration, or pressure gradients in the seawater surrounding the fish causes a displacement of that fluid within the canals. As the fluid in the canals moves, it actually touches what we call the cupula. The cupula is basically this little jelly-filled cap that sits over some sensory hairs. And so when the fluid inside the canals moves, it bumps against that cupula and it makes the cupula bend. And so when the cupula bends, it actually triggers the nerves that sit underneath there. And so the lateral line is what allows fish to maintain organized schools. It helps some fish hunt for hidden prey in the sand. It helps fish maintain their orientation, and it also helps fish with their spatial awareness. Okay, so this is the reason why when you're diving, you don't really see fish bumping into each other when they're in a school, okay? They always know where their neighbors are around them. They know exactly how close they are to their neighbors, which is amazing. And it's all got to do with this amazing system of sensory organs that they have. Open water fish, like tuna, are built for straight line speed and long distance swimming. On the other hand, reef fish have body shapes that are perfectly suited for darting around reefs and changing direction. So for example, some of our reef fish have deep, laterally compressed bodies with streamlined fins to maximize their maneuverability, while others are long and streamlined to help them effectively hunt. So things like your angelfish and your butterfly fish, these would be our laterally compressed fish, okay? So they're quite streamlined. Laterally compressed basically means that you've got a ball and you've put both you've put your hands on each side of the ball, on either side of the ball, and you've brought your hands together and you've squashed it flat. Okay, so it's squashed flat upwards like that. If you have a fish, say, for example, a stingray, we would call that dorso-ventrally compressed. Okay, so that's the ball, and you've put your hand at the top and the bottom of the fish, and you have squashed it that way. Okay, so that would be dorso-ventrally compressed. But yeah, our angelfish and our butterfly fish would be laterally compressed. Things like your barracuda and your trumpet fish, okay, these guys, they have really tubular, streamlined bodies, okay, so they are maximizing their effectiveness at catching their prey. So one of the most outstanding features of reef fish is their remarkable assortment of vibrant colors and variety of patterns. Color patterns play an important role in intra- and interspecific communication among reef fish. Okay, so basically that means that the colorations and markings that fish have, they use it not only to communicate with other individuals of their own species, but also with other species of fish. Okay, so different fish. The huge variety of color patterns testifies to the need for fish to recognize and identify each other in the crowded reef environment. The distinction between males and females, so for example, our parrotfish over here, and the ability to identify territorial fish are of particular importance. The relationship between predators and prey among reef fish plays an important evolutionary role in the development of color patterns. This has dictated the evolution of patterns for camouflage and masking. So, for example, our scorpion fish. Confusing color patterns such as horizontal and vertical stripes, or perhaps lines that conceal the eye. So, for example, our butterfly fish often have that line that conceals the eye. Color patterns that imitate the environment, and much more. In addition, various patterns have evolved for decoration and display, warning colors and patterns with which fish deceive and masquerade. Color patterns may also change during the development of certain fish, mainly due to maturation or physiological changes in certain periods of a life cycle, for example, during courtship and reproduction, and also to a gender change, which is very characteristic among fish. Warning colors are characteristic of toxic or venomous fish. Okay, so for example, our lionfish, they have what we call contrasting colors. Okay, so they're quite easily seen, and that is definitely to confuse their prey and to also confuse predators and avoid predators. Things like our angelfish, okay, angelfish are quite well known for changing color as they grow and as they mature. So this example that we have here is actually one that is busy with that transition phase. So you can see the concentric rings of the juvenile coloration sitting underneath those horizontal stripes that tend to come out once they become adults. So the patterns and markings and that kind of thing can definitely help us in identifying fish. And we've actually got special names for all the different kinds of markings, which we are going to talk about here. So, for example, lines would be things that kind of radiate out from the eye. Okay, so little lines or stripes or whatever you want to call them, that would be lines radiating from the eye. Any vertical markings, so for example, this over here, any vertical markings on a fish would be called bars. Okay, so bars run in a vertical fashion. Stripes would be these horizontal kind of markings. So we call those ones stripes. And then bands would be your diagonal kind of markings that you might see on fish. We also get lines that might be running in any direction kind of along the body as well. Okay, so you might see those as well. Then we've got some names for the different types of spots and that kind of thing. So up at the top here, we've got our oscillated spot. Okay, so this is kind of like a bullseye kind of thing. So you've got that solid spot, solid colored spot in the middle with a ring of color around it. Okay, so that's what we would call an oscillated spot. A normal spot is just a normal spot, really. Okay, it's just a well-defined patch of color, I guess. Speckles would be any, of those fine little dots that you might see on a fish, and then a blotch would be just any like irregular marking that doesn't really fit into any of these other categories that we've given here. So it's always really important that you make mental notes of any distinguishing features on fish that you don't really know, so that you can look them up after the dive. And particularly with coloration and that kind of thing, coloration and markings definitely does help with identifying fish to species. So very, very important to definitely practice making mental notes of these kinds of characteristics. So observations of fish feeding can also help us with identification, because fish have physical and behavioral adaptations for feeding. For example, parrotfish and butterfly fish have specialized mouths, jaws, and teeth to help them feed. Parrotfish have fused teeth that form a beak, and this is used for scraping algae off the reef. Butterfly fish have long protruding mouths that allow them to nibble on individual coral polyps. Omnivorous fish like snappers or our angelfish over here Okay, these guys have more standardized jaws, and this allows them to feed on both algae and invertebrates. It's important to note that some species actually exhibit ontogenetic shifts in feeding habits, which means that while as juveniles they might be feeding on one thing, they'll actually switch to feeding on something different when they grow up. Okay, so for example, there are some species of wrasse that prefer to feed on small parasites and that kind of thing when they are juveniles, but then when they become adults, they actually prefer to eat coral. So that is an important note to have. Carnivores usually have very large mouths with sharp teeth. So think of things like your groupers, kingfish, barracuda, all of those types of fish. They've got those big mouths and big sharp teeth. Okay. Goatfish, like our little goatfish over here, they've got a sensory barbel that help them find prey in the substrate. So you can see that barbel on this example over here. And they use that to help them kind of dig around in the sand and find little invertebrates and that kind of thing that they feed on that bury themselves and hide away in the sand. It's also great to have a look at when the fish is feeding. So the time of day that you see a fish feeding can also help us identify the type of fish that it is. So for example, is the fish kind of feeding during the day? Is it hunting at nighttime? What is it doing? So those are also really good things to just keep in mind. So since we're talking about adaptations, I thought I'd include this example. This is the tube-lip wrasse, and this fish is pretty cool. So for hungry fish, corals make a pretty difficult meal. Venomous, coated with mucus, and embedded in a razor-sharp, calcified skeleton. But one species, the tube-lip wrasse, has developed an unusual strategy to evade these stinging defenses. This fish gives corals slime-covered kisses. So wrasses that don't feed on coral have thin lips and protruding teeth that resemble a beak. So for example, having a look at our little chorus over here, he doesn't feed on coral, okay? So you can see he's got those kind of protruding teeth, where this is our tube-lip wrasse, and we're going to talk about his lips in a second. So the tube-lip wrasse has these elongated fleshy lips that they use to suck up a reef's protective mucus coating. So if we have a look at the scanning electron microscope pictures over here, we can see that the lips of the tube-lip wrasse are furrowed with tiny channels and divots. They're soft and ribbed like gills on the underside of a mushroom. Those grooves contain mucus glands that can cover the wrasse's lips in a protective slime. And this mucus helps protect the lips from the coral's stinging cells that we learnt about yesterday. So you might know clownfish or anemone fish. They've got a similar thing where they also produce a protective mucus coating over their whole bodies. All right, these guys just create that protective mucus over their lips to protect their lips. In combination with the grooves, the mucus helps the tube-lip wrasse to form a seal against jagged pieces of coral. This enables them to suck up their meal of the coral's mucus like someone drinking a milkshake through a straw. Now, I found a really cool video about this tube-lip wrasse that I will be posting in the related materials section of our classroom. So do check that out. It is a really cool video to watch. Yeah, really interesting how these guys feed. Another cool feeding strategy is what we call suction feeding. So feeding on small organisms in water poses quite the challenge compared to feeding on land. This is because of the density of water. The density of water is about the same as that of the prey, and so the prey tends to be pushed away when the mouth closes. So think of when you're trying to get like eggshell fragments out of the egg before you start frying it, okay? It's always a little tricky because every time you put the fork kind of close to the fragment, it tends to kind of get pushed away. So fish kind of have the same problem when they're trying to feed in water. So many fish have actually evolved the strategy of suction feeding to overcome this challenge. Instead of trying to get close to the prey, they actually force the prey to come close to them. So very simply, the fish will open its mouth very, very quickly, which creates a vacuum inside the oral cavity. This forces water to rush in, and along with the water comes the prey. Now, the structuring of the skull and the jaw to allow for this suction feeding kind of strategy, it does lead to some trade-offs. So you can't have everything all the time. In suction feeders, the better you are at suctioning, the less force you are able to actually bite down with. Another trade-off comes in the size of the prey that they are targeting. So fish with smaller mouth apertures are able to create more of a suction, and so their accuracy in suctioning up small prey is actually higher, okay? On the other hand, fish with a larger mouth, they are unable to create the same kind of suctioning ability, and so they would actually need to target larger prey items to actually survive. And yeah, I've got a couple cool little videos of the suction feeding as well that I will also post in the related materials section. Ram feeding is also a method of feeding underwater, and this is one where the predator moves forward with its mouth open and engulfs the prey along with the water surrounding it. So during ram feeding, the prey remains fixed in space and the predator moves its jaws past the prey to capture it. The motion of the head may cause the fluid to move in such a way that it might push the prey away from the jaws, okay? But these fish avoid this by actually allowing the water to kind of flow right through its jaws, so into its mouth and kind of out through the gills, as opposed to coming in and out like the same hole, I guess. So a lot of planktivorous fish, or fish that feed on plankton, use ram feeding. For example, herrings hunt copepods, and copepods are these tiny planktonic crustaceans. Now, the herrings use ram feeding when they come across a big group of copepods. They swim with their mouth wide open and their opercula, or their gills, fully expanded. Every little bit, they close and they clean their gill rakers for a few milliseconds, and this is how they filter feed. The fish all open their mouths and opercula, or gills, wide at the same time. The school of herring also swim in a grid-like formation where the distance between each fish is the same as the jumping length of the copepods that they are feeding on. So they definitely are not going to let any copepods escape. So they're pretty cool. These fish over here that I've got in this example, these are our fusiliers, okay? They're quite common on our Sodwana reefs, and these guys are also planktivorous feeders. So definitely next time you come across a big school of them, check them out. They're quite fun to watch while they feed. You can actually see them opening their mouth up really, really wide, and you kind of see the gills working and the gill rakers and all of that. So they're quite interesting to watch. Now, the reef is quite a dangerous environment for some fish, and so, there's predators lurking all around. So a lot of fish have developed really interesting protection and defense adaptations. So, for example, our gobies, they tend to hide away in little reef crevices. So you can see an example of a goby here. He's hiding away in a little empty worm tube, okay? So he found this little tube, and he's hiding away nice and safe. No predator is going to get to him in there. Other organisms tend to rely on camouflage and slow movement. So think of your seahorse, okay? Your seahorses like to move nice and slowly. They kind of blend in with their surroundings. They're quite hard to spot, and that's the way they like it. They like to kind of blend in. They don't want to draw too much attention to themselves. They're just going to, camouflage and move nice and slowly. Other fish, like our damselfish, they actually keep themselves to their known areas, okay, with all the known hiding places. So damselfish they tend to be quite territorial in that they will find a patch on the reef and they will stay at that patch of reef. They won't venture too far off, okay? And that is simply for the reason that they know exactly where all the safe hiding holes are on that section of the reef, okay? They don't want to move or, go and visit their friends down on the other side of the reef because they don't know where all the safe hiding places are. So they're gonna stay right where they know that they are safe. A lot of fish choose to form big schools or shoals, okay? So things like your fusiliers and your snappers, all right, for the very simple reason that there is safety in numbers, okay? It's a lot safer to have, all your friends around you. The predators are going to be confused. They're not really going to know where, one individual fish is that they can target. So definitely safety in numbers is the strategy that those guys are going for. Pufferfish actually inflate their bodies, and so when they feel threatened, they swallow lots of water, okay, and they puff themselves up nice and big, okay, and this is actually to kind of scare the predators off, I guess, and also just to kind of confuse them a little bit. A predator may see like a deflated pufferfish and think, oh yes, I can get my mouth around that, I'm going to try eat that, and then obviously when the pufferfish puffs himself up, the predator gets a bit confused because obviously his judgment wasn't quite right. So that's the strategy that they go for. Our lionfish over here, so these guys over here, I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with lionfish. They're very beautiful to see. And, those spines that they have are really, really obvious. And so those spines are for defense, okay? Some fish do have venomous spines. So, for example, like our lionfish, okay, they do have those venomous spines that they use to protect themselves. Other fish may be toxic. So if a fish is toxic, it means that it is poisonous to eat or touch. Okay, so things like your spotted trunkfish, your soapfish, some pufferfish are also known to be toxic. So if an animal tries to eat that fish, they'll get quite sick or may even die. Compare that with venomous fish, so things like your stonefish, scorpionfish, lionfish, all of those guys, they actually have like venom glands or toxin glands that they use. Like they'll have spines that puncture the predator or whatever's attacking them, and as they puncture the skin of that animal, the toxins are then delivered through that puncture wound. So I have a video on the related materials, I think, of stonefish, and it kind of shows you how the stonefish venom glands work. So that's quite an interesting video, so do go check that one out. So there were also some other really amazing adaptations on the reef. So a number of symbiotic relationships exist, and a symbiotic relationship can be either mutualistic, parasitic, or commensal. So mutualistic symbiotic relationships are those where both parties benefit from the relationship. So we already spoke about the coral and the zooxanthellae yesterday. Okay, that's quite a classic example of a symbiotic relationship or a mutualistic relationship on reefs. Okay, we've also got another classic one here, the anemone fish and the anemone. We've got our shrimp gobies and shrimps, our cleaner shrimp or cleaner wrasse, and other bigger fish. Okay, so sea anemones are cnidarians, and they've got those nematocysts or those stinging cells on the tentacles, just like jellyfish and corals. These nematocysts deter predators. So anemone fish actually build up a tolerance to the anemones by producing a mucus over their skin that prevents the nematocysts from firing. The anemone fish have a safe place to live in exchange for keeping the anemone clean and debris-free. The mutualistic relationship between shrimp gobies, which are also known as prawn gobies in some other parts of the world, and alphaeid shrimps, which live together in the same burrow, has been known for many years. So the shrimp has poor eyesight. It builds and maintains the burrow, while the keen-eyed goby serves as a lookout at the burrow entrance. The shrimp spends much of the daylight hours bulldozing sand or rubble from the burrow, and each time it emerges from the burrow entrance, it rests one of its antennae on the body of the goby. If the goby detects danger, the back end of its body will quiver or shake to alert the shrimp. The goby may also back into the burrow and actually block the exit for the shrimp, okay? And if the threat escalates, the goby will go right into the burrow, and then the shrimp will know it's not safe to go outside. We're just going to wait until my guide dog tells me that it's okay to go outside. And then, of course, we know about our cleaner wrasse and cleaner shrimp. Okay, they do a great job at keeping our other reef fish nice and healthy. Okay, it's kind of like a little spa day for the bigger host fish, I guess. They get all their dead skin cells exfoliated off. They get all the little parasites and that kind of thing removed off their bodies and out of their mouths, and any dead or rotting fish or whatever food, that kind of thing, in their mouths, in their gills, that all gets cleaned away, and they leave feeling good as new. And then, of course, the cleaner wrasse or the cleaner shrimp benefit from that relationship by actually getting a meal out of it. So they quite enjoy that relationship. So parasitic symbiotic relationships are those where one organism in the partnership benefits and the other one is actually harmed by that relationship. So these ones are quite common. So these are isopod parasites found on various species of angelfish and butterfly fish. Okay, so you can see we've got two over here. So we've got one over here, another one over here on this guy, and then you can see one over here. All right, now you'll probably notice on these examples here that the scales of the fish have actually grown a bit funny, around where the isopod has attached itself. So that kind of tells me that isopod has probably been attached to that fish for quite some time. Throughout its development, the fish has obviously grown a bit since that isopod is there, and they're just hanging on. They're just having a great time. So yeah, definitely you can see the fish itself is probably not enjoying that relationship too much, but those isopods are getting a great meal. They're getting a free ride. They're having a great time. Commensal symbiotic relationships are those where one organism benefits, and while the other does not necessarily benefit from the partnership, it's not actually harmed either. Okay, so probably one of the most common most well-known examples would be our remoras. Okay, so you can see two of them on our manta ray over here. So yeah, remoras have evolved the specialized pad on the top of its head to help it suck onto larger fish, sharks, and turtles. Okay, the remora gets a free ride, it gets protection and easy access to scraps of food, but the host organism doesn't actually receive anything, but they're not harmed by that relationship either. Okay, so they're not negatively affected by the remora sucking onto them at all. Another example that we have is little juvenile fish. So for this example here, we've got juvenile golden kingfish or golden trevallies that are displaying what we call piloting behavior, which means that they hang around larger species because there's a higher chance of them finding scraps of food, and they probably benefit from the protection of that larger fish as well. Okay, so we do get that quite a lot. Yeah, so just a few tips for identification of fish, okay? I've got a picture here of the Reef Guide, okay? This is a book by Dennis King and Valda Fraser. It's an amazing resource that a lot of us in Sodwana use to help us identify fish, corals, nudibranchs, and invertebrates. So yeah, definitely very helpful. I would recommend finding access to something like this. So maybe not this book, if you don't have access to this book in particular, that's okay. There are heaps of other resources out there There's even a few online kind of resources that you can look at as well to help you identify fish and that kind of thing that you see underwater. But definitely the most important, I guess, tip I can give you is make mental notes of any distinguishing characteristics of the fish that you see. Like that sounds a bit, it sounds a bit funny, but definitely do take notes of those distinguishing characteristics. Okay, so have a look at body size and shape, have a look at the shape of the head, have a look at the shape of the tail. Are there any weird spines or anything that you can see on your fish that you want to identify? Also have a look at the habitat. So is it sitting quite close to the reef? It doesn't want to move too far off the reef. Is it quite high up in the water column? Is it over sand? Is it over reef? That kind of thing can also help us distinguish determine what kind of fish it is. It's best to start off by trying to place the fish that you see into a family group. Okay. Now I'll just put it out there. The families that we are going to cover in these lectures are only a very small portion of fish families found on reefs. Okay. Like I said, the coral reefs are incredibly diverse, and so if I were to go through all the families and all the species, we'd be here forever. Okay, so definitely we're only going to be looking at a few of these families, but they're some of the more common ones that we find in Sodwana, and so it's definitely a good place to start if you do want to start learning about the things that you are seeing underwater. Like I said, use reef guides to help you. Any identification slates, that kind of thing, those are always helpful. And of course, use each dive you do as an opportunity to learn a new fish family or species. Okay, so I still do this myself. Every time I get in the water, I'm always looking at fish and kind of trying to work out what fish I actually can't identify. So what fish I can't name while I'm underwater. And then I choose one for that dive, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to look at this fish and I'm going to try work out exactly what this fish is. And so I'll take those mental notes that I've told you about, and then at the end of the dive, I'll come out and I'll go into my reef guide and I'll try find that particular fish. And then there you go, then you've learned another fish, and you just keep doing that. And just starting nice and slowly like that, that's kind of how you build your knowledge base up. So that's that for today. I'm going to get my camera on so I can say hello. Okay. And we're just going to take some time for some questions. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Just having a look through some of our questions and comments and that kind of thing that has come up already. You are so welcome, guys. I'm so glad that you enjoyed that this lecture. This is definitely one of my favorite topics to talk about. I really enjoy the kind of biology and the physiology and that kind of thing. All the adaptations are always super interesting to learn about, so definitely I enjoy talking about it. So thanks for listening. I don't know of any apps. I haven't used any smartphone apps or anything for reef guides. I'm a bit old school. I like the smell of books, and I like the solid book in my hand. But I'm sure there would be some out there. So definitely have a look. Let us know if you find anything that's cool. Share it with us. Yeah, so goatfish and snappers like to hang around each other. Again, like, the fish kind of make friends with each other. They don't necessarily only stay friends with their own type. So yeah, they all kind of just live together in harmony. Humpback whales classified as ram feeders? I'd say so. Yeah. Any of those. Oh, Siri is talking to me. Any of those kind of planktivorous whales, yeah, I'd classify them as ram feeders. So I've got a question here from Alexandra. I've heard that the ember parrotfish got a vampiric parasite on its beak at night, and the fish secretes a mucus at night. Do you see this often at Sodwana? So I'm not so sure about the parasite sitting particularly on its beak. There's not really any flesh on its beak, so I wouldn't know why it would be doing that. But yes, parrotfish do secrete mucus. So when I think we talk about parrotfish in the next lecture, actually, you will learn, but I'll give you guys a little, I guess, taster now. Yes, parrotfish do make a little cocoon of mucus for them to sleep in, and that's actually to stop parasites from getting onto them while they're sleeping at nighttime. It also masks the smell of the parrotfish, because there's a lot of our predatory fish that hunt at nighttime, and so if they smell a sleeping fish, okay, it's like, that would be a super easy meal for them to get. So parrotfish protect themselves by making this little cocoon of mucus that they sleep in, and that actually stops the smell from reaching those hunting fish. Do you see this often at Sodwana? Well, we don't do night dives, so I haven't seen this in Sodwana, but we do get parrotfish here, and all parrotfish do it, so I'm sure they would. You sometimes see like remnants of the cocoon kind of tucked away in the reef if you have an early morning dive. But the weird thing about parrotfish is that they actually consume that mucus cocoon when they wake up. So they wake up, they kind of eat themselves out of it, and then that's how they start their day. So it's kind of an interesting way of doing it. You make a little bubble of snot that you sleep in, and then you've got breakfast ready for you in the morning when you wake up. Yeah. Can parasites move from one fish to the other? I'm sure they can. I haven't done a whole lot of reading into parasites, if I'm honest. But yeah, I would assume that they would be able to. I think it obviously depends on the species of parasite as well. I'm sure some are prefer to stay on one host where others can move around. So we've got a really interesting question here. Are these lateral line organs the same ones as in sharks, or are they different? So as far as I know, they are different. Okay, the lateral line, like I said, is a canal of jelly or of fluid, where the sensory organs that sharks have are also chemosensing. Okay, so the things that sharks have are called ampullae of Lorenzini. Okay, and these are basically pores that are filled with jelly inside, like covering like their whole face. Okay. I do talk about the ampullae of Lorenzini when we do our Big Five lecture, so do keep an eye out for that one, and I'll go into a little bit more detail during that lecture. But yes, I think they are different. Let's see. Are we learning scientific or English fish family names? I'm going to give you guys the English names. We're not going to go into the Latin. Let me know though if you want me to include the Latin names. I'm quite happy to do that. But yeah, I have planned it that it is just going to be English names. When does a juvenile turn into an adult, and do they all change their look and pattern? So not all fish change their patterns or their coloration or that kind of thing. And yeah, I guess scientifically speaking, a juvenile would turn into an adult when it is mature to reproduce. Okay, so that's generally like the I guess definition of an adult in the science world, is that if it is ready to reproduce and mature enough to reproduce, it's got all its reproductive organs ready to go, then that is when you would classify it as an adult, when it is sexually mature, essentially. So yeah, not all fish do that. Not all fish change their patterns when they reach that phase, but a lot of them do. Okay, English names. Okay, we'll stick to English names. We've got some people looking for Latin names. I can always include the Latin names on the slide, but I won't get too caught up in it. I'll see how we go. Okay. Tracy Lee has seen a video of paperfish shedding their skin. Can you tell me about that? Oh my goodness, I would love to see that video. Yeah, I actually don't know much about that. If I think of like scorpionfish and that kind of thing, they, yeah, it's a bit. This is like me trying to think back to like my university labs and practicals and that kind of thing. I remember one of our practicals, we actually looked at a stonefish, which is in the same family as scorpionfish and paperfish and all of them. And I learned in that practical that they allow like algae and that kind of thing. Like they allow algae to like grow on their bodies, and that's how they help them blend in. So perhaps that paperfish was shedding its skin, I guess, to kind of get rid of maybe parasites, or maybe there was too much algae growing on it, or maybe it was sick. I don't actually know. I'm just guessing here. Yes, Latin names can be hard to pronounce, but with anything, if you say it with conviction, no one will question you. So just say it with confidence. We spoke last night about bleaching of corals. Obviously, if this happens, it will... if this happens, it will... Paolo, I'm sorry, I'm struggling to understand your question. Will reef local... sorry, if you don't mind like rewording your question just so I can understand there. I'm going to have a look at some other questions in the meantime. How many species of fish can change sex, and on average, how many times can they change in their lifetime? A good question. I can answer the second part of that question quite well. The first one, I'm not sure on how many species of fish. Yeah, there's a lot of them that can change sex, but on average, how many times? So they only change, as far as I know, they only change once. Okay, so a lot of fish, what they do is they are all born at. So let's take an example. So anemone fish. Okay, anemone fish are all born as males. All right. When they settle on anemone. Okay, and they form their little family on the anemone. The biggest, most dominant anemone fish will then transition into a female, okay? And so she will be the reproductive kind of matriarch, I guess you could call her. So she will bully the other anemone fish in that anemone, okay? And she'll keep them submissive. The next biggest animal in that anemone will be the male that mates with her, okay? So he will be the dominant male, and he will mate with her, and they will reproduce. Once she dies, so once the largest one, which is the female, once she dies, that dominant male will then take her place. And so there's like a chemical signal or something, or lack of chemicals, I guess, or pheromones, that kind of thing. I'm not sure exactly what makes them change, but I think it is like there's a lot of different cues, I guess, that would cause it to change sex, in which case it would then change to female. So the cycle just keeps going. Parrotfish as well also change sex, okay? So they all start as females, okay? So the other way around, they start as females, and then they change to males as they get bigger. And as they change to males, they then kind of change their coloration as well. But the cool thing about parrotfish is that some of the fish that change to males actually keep their female coloration for a little bit. And that allows them to get nice and close to the females and mate with them without any of the other, really big dominant males kind of chasing them off, okay? Which is pretty cool. In which way exactly do the parasites harm the fish? So yeah, they just kind of they latch on, and they just kind of drain like resources and that from the fish, as far as I know. They might share diseases as well. I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of the extent to that. Yes, hormones, that's the word I was looking for. Chemical cues, hormones. Thank you. Cool. Well, I'm glad you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys, learned something from that. Like I said in the beginning of the lecture, the quiz is now available, so you definitely can go ahead and go give that a go. Again, just another reminder, please check the Google Classroom for the link every day for these lectures. I think this platform tends to work quite well. It seems to be working quite well, so we might stick with this one. So yes, please do check the Google Classroom for the lecture link every day. No problem. Hope you all have a lovely evening. Thanks for joining us again. And we'll see you guys soon.